afternoon, welcome all. Thank you for participating to this event hosted by the European Food Forum, being a unique platform to shape policy debates around sustainable food production, as well as consumer protection, food quality, environmental safeguard, and other related issues that you may know already. We have many interesting speakers today, and their interventions, combined with the other participants' voice, will contribute to enriching dialogue and fueling debate across the agri-food sector, both at EU, national and local level. So please do not refrain from taking your proactive role during the Q&A sessions. Raise your hand and join us on this important debate. Help us passing the key messages of the event also via your social media channels, and follow the European Food Forum to keep on promoting the highlights and outcomes of today's talks. So now let's talk about food, about sustainable food with the forum's guests. Today's presentations will explore the following questions. What is the current status of food poverty in Europe? What role do EU member states and regions see for the EU? And what is the role of food redistribution and those programs offering breakfast in schools? How can this further be supported by the decision and policy makers? How can the EU tackle food poverty, and not only through the lens of hunger relief, but also through a Green Deal industrial plan that helps ensure food accessibility and affordability for consumers on the one hand, and on the other hand, the climate and biodiversity commitments. I will briefly introduce the European Food Forum scope. The European Food Forum is an independent, politically led, non-partisan forum, led and governed by the elected members of the European Parliament. The forum aims to promote open multi-stakeholder dialogues on sustainable food systems among policymakers, food supply chain actors, civil society organizations, research and academia, and other public institutions. It was founded, as you may know already, at the end of 2019 by 5 hosting MEPs and from different countries, belonging to 3 European Parliament political groups. Now the forum has 38 MEPs, Member of Parliament, covering all the 7 political groups. The forum does not only itself take position on specific policy issues. So let me remind that this event is hosted by the 4 hosting MEPs, MEP Irene Tolleret, Maria Soraya Rodriguez Ramos, Christine Schneider, and Petros Kokkalis. Regrettably, due to agenda conflicts, MEP Schneider and Kokkalis will not be with us today. They expressed their apologies for not being there. So I will just briefly go through some info for the attendees, and then we will start the debate. This is an open debate, so every participant can ask questions and can take an active part to the discussions. You can raise your virtual hand, and the question should be no longer than 1 minute each. So you can add your question to the chat, or just raise your hand and speak yourself. But don't be shy, and please come along with your questions. We are here to have your voice heard. The event will be recorded for your information and counts also on the participation of journalists. So there will be media representatives joining the debate. So let's start with the opening remarks by the hosting MEP Irene Tolleret, who is chair of the European Food Forum. Please, now the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Giulia. Merci.
Thank you very much, Giulia. Thank you to the European Food Forum to be there for this very important topic, very dear to my heart, that was already in my mind when we met to create this food forum, because the topic of food and access to healthy and quality food is of the essence. And for me, it is one of the most basic rights of all individuals. According to the figures of 2021 of the European Federations of Food Banks that are present in 29 countries on the EU continent. Over 12 million people were helped and 900,000 tons of food were distributed. These were based on around 50,000 charities organizations that are spread throughout the European territory. So that means that these programs are indispensable, but they should be improved because obesity and diabetes are more important on the more precarious populations that are not in a capacity of buying their own food. So for me, it is absolutely crucial that quality and affordable food be a priority or the priority for our union. I would like to thank more specifically Patrick Doucet, president of the Resto du Cœur, who makes a wonderful work thanks to the European funds, notably the European Social Fund. One meal out of 4 is being funded by the ESF. And I am very much interested in all your contributions and all your questions, because especially now in the midst of energy crisis, inflation crisis, food crisis, we have to be up to the challenge. And all European policies aiming at improving the quality of our food should not left aside the most deprived of our societies. So thank you to everybody, and I will listen to you while switching off my camera. Thank you.
Very much, Mep Toléré. Any questions? Otherwise, I will introduce the next speaker, Mr. Lukáš Vízek, member of the European, member of the cabinet of Frans Timmermans, Executive Vice President of the European Commission. Mr. Vízek, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I would like to just clear out one thing in the very beginning. And this event is about food poverty, and I think that poverty has many forms, and we have seen this. We have been much more in contact, in touch with the increasing number of people in poverty over the past. Well, it started with COVID. It was existing already before COVID. It got worse through COVID, and it got even worse through the brutal Russian aggression against Ukraine. But the point that I want to make is that poverty is just one, and it has many forms. We can talk about food poverty. We can talk about energy poverty, which is also a big topic that has come up very, very recently. But in the end, it comes down to the fact that we have to deal with poverty as such. We have to deal with the fact that in 2021, in the EU, 74 million people were on an income which was lower than 60% of the median income. But having cleared out this point of a definition, which is rather boring, let me dive into the topic of the day, which is about how we actually tackle food poverty. And here again, I would like to make one point very clear upfront, which is that in order to tackle food poverty, we need a structural change. It is not just about putting band-aids here and there. They will always be necessary, unfortunately, and they are very useful. But I think we really need to focus on a structural change in a situation where food systems in the EU and globally are not in a good shape. They're not in a good shape for. I will focus on the EU at the moment. They're not in a good shape for 3 basic reasons. First of all, the food systems are suffering from the climate crisis. They also happen to be a major contributor to the climate crisis, while being at the forefront of the consequences of the climate crisis. I think we all have in our fresh memories still droughts of the last summer. which were phenomenal, but we also have to remember the droughts of every single year before. And as far as we know, the Joint Research Center tells us we are heading for another drought this year. This has an impact on food availability. It also has an impact on food affordability, and therefore it addresses, well, it is a major driver of access to food, so therefore of food poverty. The risk of climate crisis, we have to also be honest with ourselves, is a bit less. We are a bit less exposed to it than the rest of the world. In fact, the simulations show that about 1 billion children around the world, so about a half, are at an extreme risk of being affected by the climate crisis. To give you some more figures, 1 billion people live in areas which are less than 10 meters under the high tide, and 300 million people live in areas which are less than 1 meter below the level of high tide. So the risk is really very clear. And here we talk about people's homes. We could also talk about agricultural land on which food is produced. The second risk that we need to fix and address is the biodiversity risk. This is a topic which is talked about a bit less, maybe, than the climate crisis. And yet biodiversity, as we all know, is absolutely crucial for food production and for availability and affordability of food. In the EU, 1 in 3 species of bees and butterflies on which our food systems depend are actually in poor condition, and 1 in 10 species are at the risk of extinction. That's the biodiversity problem. The third problem that we have is the condition of our soils. In the EU, 60 to 70% of soils are not in a healthy condition, and that, of course, makes all the droughts even more difficult to overcome. So that's something that we need to fix as well. So now I have laid out all the issues that are behind the reasons why our food systems are not in a good shape, and I will try to give you a few answers on how we can fix that. Well, first of all, as regards the climate, the Fit for 55 package, well, the climate law was adopted already a few years ago, and the Fit for 55 package, which sets the target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. Most of its elements were actually finally adopted by the European Parliament last week and by the Council yesterday. So I would like to think that part of the response is already on a good track. As regards the biodiversity crisis, that is not so much on a good track. The Commission has put forward a proposal for nature restoration law. It has put forward a proposal for sustainable use of pesticides, and these two proposals do face a lot of headwinds. And I mean, many of you who are active in this policy area know the narrative, but let me just remind you that the narrative which is causing the headwind and the resistance to even not just negotiate these files, but to deal with these files at all, is built on concerns about food security, which is at odds with facts, I must say. We know that if we don't fix biodiversity, we know that if we don't fix nature, if we don't fix our soils, then our food security will be at risk. And if food security is at risk, then food is not going to be as affordable as it is now. And I am fully aware that it is becoming less and less affordable, primarily because of the droughts of last year. It's becoming less affordable this year. So if we don't fix this now, it is only going to come and bite us back in the future. And I would like to believe that in the in the very near future. So the answer to this part of how to tackle one of the key drivers of food security and food poverty is to get our natural environment, our biodiversity back on the right track. The final piece in the legislative puzzle that the Commission is going to propose in September this year is the proposal for the framework for sustainable food systems. Now, the idea behind that is that we need to ensure that our food systems are not only that our food is not only safe, which is what we expect, but we also need to make sure that our food is also sustainable. That is the very basic. That is going to be the very basic principle of that proposal. Now, some will say that making food sustainable is going to make food more expensive and therefore less accessible to all European citizens, and therefore this is going to increase food poverty. I would argue that we need to take all the measures and all the steps to ensure that no one is left behind. A big part of this proposal is going to be focused on public procurement, to give you an example. And we have some really good experience from cities across the EU. The most possibly the most famous one is in the city of Vienna, but there are others where public procurement is extremely well functioning. And when you speak with the representatives of the city, they will tell you that that public procurement is really key in ensuring access to healthy and nutritious food for citizens, but mainly for children. Because for many of the kids, the school meal is the first meal of the day, and often is the first warm meal of the day, and often it is the only warm meal of the day. And this is why this proposal is so crucial. We're going to put forward some common definitions, some common objectives, and some common criteria to ensure that we create this new food environment where the healthy choice, where the nutritious choice is going to be the easy choice. Because at the end, food poverty in the EU comes down to the fact that people who are in that group who suffers from food poverty cannot afford a healthy, balanced, and nutritious diet. So my final conclusion on all of this, on the issue of food poverty and their link to sustainable food systems, is that if we want to reduce food poverty, we need to fix our food systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vizek, for your comprehensive contribution, which is raising indeed even more awareness of the risks of food availability and on the impacts of climate change. The points you illustrated and raised represent a concrete food for thoughts, and I believe also for press stories. So is there any questions from the audience, from the participants, or from the press for Mr. Vizek? Don't be shy. Pose your questions. Mr. Vizek introduced two very important and interesting topics, covering a number of interesting policies, from public procurement to the new programs. And it would be interesting to know how, for instance, the EU can tackle food poverty and further communicate or act on that in the future, and not only through the lens of hunger relief, but also through a Green Deal industrial plan that helps ensure food accessibility and affordability as set for consumers on the one hand, and the climate and biodiversity commitments for the other hand. So this would be my question, but I'm still curious to hear from you if there are questions. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Vizek. We will continue with our debate. And thank you very much, by the way, both you and MEP Tolere for being to the point in this presentation. We start with the first panel, but first I would like to remind you that we have interpretation in 2 languages, Spanish and French. So you can avail yourself of this support, of this language support if needed. Let me remind to the speakers that your intervention will last only 5 minutes in order to have some time saved for a Q&A session at the end of your intervention. Please, Mrs. Kate Prince, the floor is yours, Senior Manager of ESG Kellogg Company.
Thank you, Julia. Luisella, I think you were going to share my slides for me today. Thank you, thanks a lot. So hello everyone, as Julia said, my name is Kate Prince and I lead the food insecurity programs throughout Europe for Kellogg. So thank you for inviting us today to share insights from our research into hunger across Europe. For those who don't know Kellogg, our local European HQ is situated in Ireland, and we have 3 factories in the EU which produce well-known brands such as cornflakes and Cocoa Pops and Special K. We believe that breakfast is the most important meal of the day and that part of running a good business is doing good for society. As such, our dedication to fighting hunger is part of the company's DNA and a key pillar of our Better Days ESG commitments. Next slide, please. So as part of our work, I regularly talk to and visit our charity partners across the region. And over the last 6 months, all were sharing stories with us about the increase in demand for their services. We had commissioned research back in 2016 to explore the topic of food insecurity. So we decided to revisit this research to get a more up-to-date picture and to gain insight from families and teachers on the impact of the current cost of living crisis. We surveyed 10,000 people in 7 countries in Europe, and the results sadly confirmed our fears and showed us why it's more important than ever for Kellogg to support breakfast clubs and food charities. So now I'll go into the research findings. Next slide, please. The number of families struggling has increased since 2016 and has been exacerbated by the difficulties experienced as a result of the COVID pandemic. At 39% were negatively impacted, and the cost of living crisis has compounded this, with 59% saying there's been a moderate or significant reduction in their disposable income. Next slide, please. Our research also showed that 30% are worried about the amount of money they have to spend on food. And this number has doubled since 2016, with 10% saying they have to choose between buying food and paying for other essentials like heating. A quarter struggle to feed their family, which is an increase in most countries, with the most significant problem being in the UK and France. And despite this struggle, more than half of respondents said they would be ashamed to use a food bank. Next slide, please. We also spoke to teachers, and 3/4 of those surveyed said they see children coming to school hungry. And this is up in most countries and the highest in France and the UK. Half of those that responded said the situation has got worse over the last year, and the most noticeable effects in the children are tiredness and difficulty concentrating in class. Teachers are giving children in their class food when they arrive hungry. Sometimes it's food the school has, but 40% said they have brought in food from home. And they're taking time out of their day to help these children. 61% said they lose 2 hours a week or more helping hungry children. Next slide, please. So we know we have a problem with child hunger before school, but we also have a proven way of helping, and that's through breakfast clubs. So what is a breakfast club? Well, it's simple, really. They're clubs where children are offered breakfast in a safe and friendly environment, usually at schools in the communities of greatest need. And they last for around 30 or 60 minutes, and they're free of charge in much of Europe, and they're run by school teachers, charities or volunteers. Kellogg have been supporting breakfast clubs for 25 years, so we've learned a lot about the benefits in this time. You know, they help improve attendance and punctuality, they improve concentration and behaviour, and this in turn can help with academic performance. And of course, the impact of food poverty is minimised. Next slide, please. Here we can see the reach of our programmes across the region. We invest around €2 million a year and support over 1,000 clubs. And we do this by working with local charity partners. And our emphasis is on providing money to support the running of the clubs. And only occasionally do we provide cereal that is school food compliant. Next slide, please. In terms of our policy asks, we support the objectives from the EU Child Guarantee, which recommends member states to invest resources to tackle child poverty, especially the objective to guarantee at least one healthy meal each school day. More recently, as part of the Farm to Fork strategy, a review is ongoing of the EU school scheme supporting the distribution of milk, fruit and vegetables to school children. We believe that it's important for breakfast provision at school to be recognised as a valuable destination for this support, and that synergies with existing programmes, both public and private, should be considered to increase reach and impact. And the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy have set ambitious goals with the aim for the EU to become the global sustainability leader. But some of these policies are likely to create additional inflation. So we ask that the Commission considers enablers and investment to support the transition and ensure that food remains available and affordable for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Breeze. Now we give the floor to Angela Frigo to give a presentation under this first panel, the status of food poverty in Europe. Angela Frigo is the Secretary General of FEBA, the European Food Banks Association.
Yes, thank you very much. So in the meantime, I was sharing my screen with the presentation. So, well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity to intervene this afternoon in this conference. And I will give you a very brief overview on our organization, and then I will focus more on the current situation and the impact of the socioeconomic crisis on the food banks. So our organization is a no-profit organization based in Brussels. It was established in 1986, and we represent 30 members in 30 European countries, of which 22 in EU member states. And the daily commitment of our members consists in preventing food waste to reduce food insecurity. This is our mission since 1986, and in addition to this, we also support the development of the food banks in the different countries where they are most needed, and this is our mission is in line, or let's say contribute also to the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular the SDG 2 and the SDG target 12.3. And just to give you a few numbers to understand a bit the activity. So as I said, we have 30 members in 30 European countries, bringing together a network of more than 350 food banks. And they are recovering food from the different food business operators, food which is still edible and safe, but that could potentially become a food waste. But thanks to the food banks, this food is recovered, is stored in the food banks, in the warehouses, and then is redistributed to a network of more than 45,000 organizations at local level, like soup kitchens or food pantries, shelters for homeless people or other kind of communities that are then providing the food to people in need in Europe. And as you can imagine, well, the numbers have, the evolution of the numbers has changed a lot since the pandemic in 2020. And if we consider just the number of end beneficiaries, we moved from 9.5 million people in needs in 2019 up to 11.8 million in 2021. And we are currently analyzing the data from 2022, but we still see this increase also this year in 2023. And at the same time, the food that we were able to recover was, we're speaking in 2021 of 900,000 tons of food, and 60% of this food is a surplus food. So it's food which is saved from becoming food waste. And then we have also other sources of supply like food collections or the Fund for European Aid to the Most Deprived, and also the withdrawal scheme of fruit and vegetables from the market. We recently circulated a survey to our members to assess the impact of the socioeconomic crisis on their daily activity in 2022. And I will briefly share with you the key findings of this survey. So we wanted to better understand what are the repercussions in terms of cost of living crisis on the operation of the food banks, but also what is the profile of end beneficiaries. And the focus was on 2022 from January to December, and we received a feedback from 27 out of 30 members. And the main, the key findings, so as you can see, the main impact was the cost of living crisis. So for 88.9% of the respondents, it was a major concern in 2022. Then it was followed by the war in Ukraine, directly in Ukraine or indirectly in the other countries that were helping the refugees. Also other kind of crises like the weather and also climate change, and COVID-19, which was considered was still impacting the activity, but it was and is still a kind of business as usual concern that we are daily facing. Two comments, one as regards the food and the other as regards the end beneficiaries. So in general, we see that food banks are recovering, most of the food banks are recovering more food, which is a good news, but at the same time, if we look at the demand from the charities, they are asking for more food. And you can see here in the map that most of the countries, the demand for food in most of the countries increased. In a few countries remain stable. And so it means that even if the food banks were able to recover and redistribute more food, this was not enough to fulfill the requests from the charities. Two other points that I would like to share with you. The first one is that the fact that we were able to recover and redistribute more food had an impact also on our own activity, and inflation was impacted, meaning that we had to face higher costs in terms of electricity, fuel for vehicles, and also gas. So it was more expensive to do our daily, to run our daily activity. And the last point that I would like to share with you is that, so as we said, that the demand from the charities increased because there was an increase in the number of end beneficiaries. And something that we discovered in this survey is that the increase was mainly due to a kind of new people at risk. So people with an employment contract, so but that are not able to cover the bills at the end of the month, or at the end of the month they have to choose between paying the electricity bill or do the grocery shop. So just to conclude and to share also some recommendations with you, well, we believe that as European Food Banks Federation, that wasting food is never acceptable, but especially today when we are living in a time of crisis and a time of food crisis, we need to ensure that no crumb is wasted and that we do everything is possible to save food from becoming food waste. There is a lot of potential, so there is still a lot of food that we can recover and that we can redistribute. The main problem is that today is more expensive to run our activities. And what we suggest is really to give resources to save good food that is rejected or refused by the market, but is saved with a social purpose, and to promote incentives that could be fiscal incentives, but also administrative simplification. So trying to facilitate as much as possible those who are willing to donate on one side, but also to facilitate those who are doing the job and those who are donating food to people in need. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I remain at your complete disposal for any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Figo, for your fully detailed presentation and for introducing the activities of your organization. And now we give the floor to Susanna Konradova, EU Affairs Coordinator at Eurochild Invisible Children, and Eurochild's 2022 report on children in need across Europe. She will introduce recommendations. So, Ms. Konradova, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting Eurochild to this important meeting. So, indeed, I will try to share my presentation. Just a second. Okay, so hello again. My name is Susanna Konradova, and I work as the EU Affairs Coordinator at Eurochild. And today I would like to introduce briefly our organization, which is a non-profit organization based in Brussels, and also speak to the findings and recommendations of the Invisible Children report, speaking about the children need across Europe. So Eurochild is a European civil society organization, and our vision and mission is to see a society where our children are happy, healthy, and and respected as individuals in their own rights. Our organization has almost 200 members in 37 countries, and we represent all European Union member states, but also countries in accessions and countries in neighborhood. And still we have many members from also United Kingdom. So in last year, we conducted this report, Invisible Children report, Eurochild report on children in need across Europe. This report collected information from 22 countries, and we have 35 members contributing. The aim of the report was actually to find the state of children in the EU, and also to find the lived experience of children, their families, regarding the current situation. We also by this report, we also try to inform the European Union processes, such as the European semester, and provide timely information to this process, and so to live up the expectation of the partnership principle. Yeah. So yes, I briefly spoke about this. I also would like to share the basic information that we know about the child poverty. So currently there is almost 20 million of children that live that are at risk of poverty and social exclusion in the EU. And this number comes from the 2021. So it's actually estimated that for 2022, it will be higher because of the impact of indeed the COVID pandemic, but also of the increasing cost of living and energy crisis. Also, our members reported that there, for example, in Portugal, there are 10,000 more children living in poverty. And in Finland, there are already 16,000 new families that have fallen below the poverty line since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. So when we speak about the countries that have the highest rate of the child poverty, the first is Romania, it's at 45.5%. Spain is now the second, and the third is Bulgaria at 33%. Compared to 2021, indeed, this increase has been noted in 17 countries, and the highest demographic group, for example, in Ireland, the children are the second highest demographic group at risk of poverty. And also an analysis of food security shows that families with 3 or more children are 3 times more vulnerable to food insecurity when compared to adults with no children. In addition to our Invisible Children report that actually collects the voice of civil society organizations, we also collect the opinions of children. So we are about to publish our report, which will be called the Child Poverty Report, Children's Views. And this was informed by our organizations that implement the child participation in Malta, Croatia, Bulgaria, and Estonia. Many children identified that hunger as a direct result of the poverty. And they also reported that what poverty means for them, it's not possibility to buy and to reach the main necessities. And they also explained that it has impact on their social life, also increased, they are more prone to bullying in school, not only by peers, but also by teachers. And that also poverty means for them being isolated, and also it has a great impact on their physical and mental health. So what children recommended is for years to have better jobs and better salaries for their parents, for their families, but also the possibility of donations. And they very much also requested to have a free school lunch for children, and indeed to set up more options for children. Also, our members, provided recommendations how the system can be improved to address the needs of children living in poverty, and they proposed a set of these recommendations. So, to fight child poverty, financial and infrastructural measures need to be adopted. So, indeed, universal child benefit and universal child allowance, also to set up a minimum income. That's very important. Another important recommendation is to apply an integrated approach. So there is important, because poverty crosses many areas. So also to address this issue, cross-sectoral and cross-ministerial cooperation is needed, and also involve the municipalities in addressing these issues. In regards to the concrete services and access of children to the services, so we highlight to access to early childhood education and care, and education, access also to healthcare, and now so very much discussed housing and development of social housing for vulnerable families. All this is also included in the very welcome initiative, the European Child Guarantee, the Council recommendation establishing the European Child Guarantee, that indeed is to address the needs of the children living in poverty. And so currently the national action plans have been published by 20 member states, and we really support, so they are properly financed, implemented, monitored, and evaluated. When it comes to nutrition, our members recommend really to have free school meals for children most in need, and these free school meals should be offered in like a manner that doesn't discriminate these children more. So because in some cases, like the special area in the canteen was set for these children, so they don't want to be showed again that they are those coming from poor living conditions. So also children should receive an equivalent of a free meal during the days they are not in school. So during the holiday or during the time they are not attending the school for sickness or other reasons. They also propose to set up a system of cash benefits and food vouchers for the most vulnerable families. And last, I would like to share also our Invisible Children reports include many good practices and recommendations that our members have been already implementing. And the last one is from, it's called the Get Active program. It's implemented in the Northern Ireland. And here actually the local youth organization is organizing the meetings for youngsters and for children to address so-called holiday hunger. So indeed, lack of food during the holidays. So by this program, they already helps almost 6,000 children. And this program really combines the education, skills improvement, and provision of free meals. So by this, they succeeded to reduce also the juvenile criminality, but also to improve the confidence and skills of young people involved. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susanna, for your presentation. Now we open the panel, the session, to the questions from the audience, from the participants. Any questions?
It's Irene Toléré. I don't know if you hear me well as I am moving.
We do hear you well.
My question to all the participants would be, how can we help you on your subject? Is it by budget? Is it by legislation?
Irene, you are muted. Could you please run through that again? Could you?
Yes, sorry. I was just asking all the panelists, how can we help you more? Because there is an increase of the need. And so how can we help you more? Is it in terms of budget? Of course, yes. Is it at the European, the national level? And are there some legislative texts that could be improved so that we deliver?
I don't mind taking this first, Julia, if you like. Thank you for the question. As I said in my presentation, I think there are various things that we could do and we can do together. At Kellogg, we obviously see that the rise in demand, and we have our charity partners and our NGO partners coming to us saying, we have, schools in this district and local governments that would like to expand the Breakfast Club program that you fund with, your partners. How do we do that? And while we are very keen to do that and increase scale, we only have so much budget we can put towards this. So I think there are clever ways that we can collaborate together in order to we have very successful models in different countries that we know how to expand. And I think also by working together with the policies that you already have in place, such as, the EU Child Guarantee, how do we look at ensuring that at least one healthy meal each school day, we look at breakfast as an option for that? Because if those children have breakfast rather than, for example, break time or lunchtime, it's very hard to pick one, I understand that. But then the morning, if a child is fed and nourished in the morning, then they have much more opportunity to learn or in the first lessons of the day. And also looking at the existing EU school scheme and how we look at that distribution currently of milk and fruit and vegetables, and how we look at expanding that into other occasions like breakfast and potentially different foods as well, working together.
I'm very sorry to interrupt you, Kate. You are going through a very interesting point. However, we have a question for Angela Figo coming from the audience, so we need to stick to the time, and I'm gonna give the floor to Angela. Angela, are you still with us, Angela?
Yes, yeah,
Good.
I
Great.
see here.
Yes, so I have a question for you. You stress how your organization and the sector calls for a wider promotion of incentives, such as administrative simplifications, fiscal incentives, and this is to actually foster donations, food, economic, and in-kind donations, to non-profit organizations that are willing to redistribute food to the most deprived. Could you please run through this topic again and provide us with additional details, if you have any available, or specification on this matter? We are particularly interested in hearing from you if there are any specific proposals on this front. Thank you.
Yes, so well, thank you very much for the question. I will try to be very quick, but also clear. So I'm speaking from Stockholm, where there is the Nordic Food Waste Summit, which is organized by Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark. And for instance, and so the discussion is on food waste prevention and how to promote food donation. And now the focus is on Nordic countries, but there is the same discussion going on also in across Europe. So a common topic, or let's say an open question that we have, is that at the moment, well, we have done a lot on food donation to promote food donation, especially at EU level. But for instance, well, a problem that we still see, especially at national level, is that when we are when there is the generation of surplus foods, I mean, at the moment, if a company decides to donate surplus food or to throw it away or to use it for other purposes, like could be animal feeding or biogas or reuse, at the moment there is, in most of the countries, there are no, I mean, it's the same if a company decides to donate or to throw away food or to use it with a different purpose. Or even worse, in some cases, it's more, let's say, convenient or appealing to use surplus food for biogas or biofuel rather than donate it for human consumption. So at the moment, the fact that we see that, I mean, food donation, so it means that food could still be used for human consumption, especially for people in needs, and as we heard, the numbers are increasing across the continent. The fact that food donation is still not at the same level as other options, or in some countries is less appealing to donate food rather than to use it for other purposes. This is really a key point that should be addressed, I believe, at EU, but also at national level.
Thank you very much, Angela. And now still a question for Susanna.
May I have a question for Angela? I just would like to come back from the question of Irene Toléré that was asking, we are here, what can we do as members of the European Parliament to help you? Which kind of legislation or which kind of activities you need to go over, because the situation is terrible.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Angela. Thank you so much, Susanna. Same question for you. Thank you.
So I will give you another concrete example. So according to EU legislation, it's possible to donate food after the best before date, because after the best before dates, there is no issue in terms of food safety. It's only a matter of food quality. So it's possible. The food is still edible. And according to EU legislation, it's possible to donate it to food banks or other charities for the most deprived. So this is possible according to the EU legislation. But when it comes to member states, in some countries, this is what happens. So food banks or other charities can receive food which is donated after the best before date. In other countries, this is still not possible. And what's the consequence? The consequence is that this food is probably thrown away. So it ends up in the landfill. But what I think that is still more a bigger concern is that it cannot be given to people who need food. So I believe that, for instance, the Parliament could really, the European Parliament could really push member states to implement those rules or those policies that are already decided at European level, that are already working in some member states, but not in others.
Okay.
Okay, so
Thank you very much.
Yeah, if I may to answer this question. So for us, the European Child Guarantee actually constitutes a unique opportunity, because it's indeed this policy, guidance that requires member states to develop the national action plan to address the needs of the most vulnerable children and ensure the access of these children to 5 main services, which is education, early childhood education, nutrition, housing, and healthcare. So, and also the member states, 11 of them should allocate 5% of the European Social Fund plus national resources, to implement the national action plan of the Child Guarantee. So the deadline for submitting these action plans was actually last year in March 2022. And currently we have 21 national action plans publicly available. So still 6 countries are missing, And countries slowly started implementing these plans. So for us, it's important to push member states indeed to take this initiative, seriously. And this is a great tool that they can address the children in need. So they can develop the plans adjusted to the national conditions, by identifying indeed the vulnerable groups of children in countries. So in some countries, Roma children or children from migrant background, these can be the children that are most in need in the countries. So, and develop the plans that they can implement until 2030. So this is for us, and also if the Parliament can monitor, we know that there is a parliamentary working group within the Employment Committee to monitor the implementation, but still there should be as much push as possible indeed to properly implement the national action plans. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Susanna. And please, Ronan Mangan, who posed a question, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you to the speakers as well. My name is Ronan Mangan. I'm the Head of Social Inclusion with the Red Cross EU office based here in Brussels. Just 2 reflections first and foremost, and then I have a comment maybe based on those comments, requests I should even say made by the MEPs. First and foremost, from a Red Cross perspective, what we see at the national, local levels, reflects perfectly what Kate and Angela presented in their presentations, where we see increased demand in terms of beneficiaries and a lack of food supply, but even resources to buy food because of the cost of living crisis to meet those demands. So I think this is something that's echoed most definitely in our work as well. There's something we shouldn't forget, and this is importantly, is that food aid in itself is a tool. It's a tool to address poverty. And if we want to address child poverty, we have to look at it from a structural perspective. So I think, yes, the Child Guarantee is a useful instrument in that regard, but also I think they need to invest in the services, be they public or not-for-profit services, who are also supporting vulnerable families, vulnerable children, is an added requirement in terms of being able to address, holistically speaking, child poverty. In relation to food, and this is something we also see within the context of Red Cross, is that FEAD as a program is useful. However, it doesn't do everything. It doesn't meet entirely the needs. And very often we find that not-for-profit organizations in particular are having to offset the costs. And this is why, programs like that introduced by Case through the Breakfast Club and the Kellogg's Foundation are very, very useful complementarity actions and operations which can be used to supplement and to support. But again, we have to come from the perspective that these type of programs fail as a program in its own right. It's a tool. It's a tool to address some aspects of poverty, but it can't address all aspects of poverty until we look at the structural elements. So from the perspective of what the Parliament can do, I mean, I think we have the MFF review coming up soon. I think being very, very strong in terms of heading 2A, heading 2B, where we look at the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights in this action plan in order to move 20 million people out of poverty, 5 million of whom will be children, is very, very important. It's important that we safeguard the programs and the funding envelopes under heading 2 of the MFF in the review by the Commission. I think this is something the Parliament can most definitely do in the short term. And of course, looking ahead towards a new MFF, dedicating more funding towards addressing poverty and the structural issues which cause poverty within EU member states, of course, would be greatly welcomed by many organisations, I'm sure. But that's it from my side. But thank you again to Kate and to Angela. I think they presented, unfortunately, a very accurate picture of what things are like at the moment.
Thank you very much, Ronan. Now we have a question to give more specifications, if we can have a little bit of more information on which member states are more involved. So I give the floor to whoever is willing to answer this question among you three within this panel. The question was posed by Roxanne Husgenji.
I think she was referring to the member states that Angela was talking about potentially. Yeah.
Yes. So well, I will put in the chat a study that was commissioned by the European Commission, so that you can see there is a table with all the different member states and where we still have problems, especially as regards, as I was mentioning, the possibility to donate food after the best before. So for instance, very quickly, in Romania, they do not have two different expiry dates, so use by date and best before date, but just one. And so it means that this creates more confusion than simplifying the problem, because with just one expiry date, it's not clear when the food can be donated, or if it can be donated or not, and when. But I will put the study in the chat so that Roxanne can have a look.
Thank you very much, Angela. We will continue this very interesting exchange through the chat, and we now pass on to the second panel. What role for the EU? A national perspective. We give the floor to Patrice Douret, President on the Restos du Cœur. Let me introduce Mr. Douret as President of the Restos du Cœur. You wish to share with us the actions undertaken by your organization and carried out in France, particularly with regards to the importance of the EU efforts in the fight against social exclusion. Mr. Douret, the floor is yours.
Merci, Julia. Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Indeed, I am the president of the Restos du Cœur in France. Thank you for this exceptional debate. Thank you to Ms. Irène Toleret for her nice words. And at the end of this presentation, I would like to come back on the question you have asked. So for those who do not know, the Restaurant du Cœur, it was created in 1985 by a clown, Coluche, who passed away a few years later. So he doesn't know what the Restaurant du Cœur have become. But he wanted to give a volunteer aid to impoverished people, notably by a free meal, and also with social integration and economic actions in order to fight against poverty in all its forms. It is something which is still very much up to date with the values of neutrality and free meals. The first year, the Resto distributed 8 million meals. Today, well, last year, we served 142 million meals. It's over 2,200 centers that are spread throughout the French territory, and over 70,000 volunteers are working on it per department per department. Today, as our colleagues of the Red Cross said, we had 22%, an additional 22% of people compared to last year. And unfortunately, amongst those people, there is a figure which is very much shocking, is the number of babies from 0 to 3 years old. We had 100,000 last year. And we can say now that we have an additional 16% of babies. So we can say that child poverty is a real concern, especially for our association. You talked about the tonnage of distribution in Europe. In France, we distribute 130,000 tons of first necessity product. So food aid is the first thing that you can give once you have overcome shame. But food aid is not enough. You need to be able to support people, notably when it comes to search for employment, when it comes to budget mediation. You have also food is also the source of potential health problem. There are also social integration works like market gardening and logistics. The Resto du Cœur and food aid can be summed up in a couple of figures. So European aid is important. It is 30% of the meals we serve today, but it is not enough because in order to serve 142 million meals last year, that will probably reach 170 million at the end of this year, the Resto du Cœur need to buy about 30% of the products that we serve. And since the sanitary health crisis, we want to buy locally because it is essential to help our farmers. And then you have also donation from individuals and also from food and beverage industry. This is 30% of meals that are served in France. Today, there is a real challenge at the EU level. Very clearly, there is a strong increase of the precariousness, number of people who come at our door. And this is complicated by a silo effect. It's almost a guillotine effect, something that can really put some association to a halt because our operating costs, our purchasing costs are increasing dramatically because we are having the impact. Then there is also an impact on our own volunteers as there is an increase on the cost of living. 15% of volunteers are precarious people, and this volunteering can help them reinserting. But we have problems with them as well because they cannot pay, for example, for their transportation, and it It is a real injustice between people who have the means, who can afford to give times, and those who simply cannot. We are talking about the potential decrease of inflation during the summer, but let's not forget, and that's the lessons learned in 2008, in spite of a decrease of inflation, you can tell that precariousness will be settled for quite a long time, and prices becomes more difficult, less affordable, even for people who are working. There are people working regularly with a regular wage, and they have trouble paying for their food. So we have a budget, stable one, and in view of the increase of prices, that means that we can serve less meals. What are the potential moves forward? We think that the EU should take a strong and rapid initiative in order to support associations, charities in all of our countries. The story of the Restos du Cœur and those that are helped by EU, i.e. Red Cross, Secours Populaire, notably started in 1987 when Coluche called on to Europe for opening up the European fridges. Now we need you to help us overcome this complex situation. We won't be able to do that without you. The ESF Plus provides food, but also hygiene, clothing, and logistic costs were important and taken charge of by the EU. There is a real leverage effect when a public euro is given to the Restos du Cœur. Thanks to the volunteering and thanks to our management, we can develop 6 euros of actual aid on the field. Today, we provide food aid to 4 million people every year, 16 million Europeans. 16 million Europeans depend on European aid just for feeding themselves. The goal of the ESF Plus is to highlight the sustainable, and I insist, sustainable reintegration in society, allowing for food aid, which is an entry point for survival, but also for social inclusion. It is also a local and national deployment in the midst of our territories, and we have several centers developed in rural areas as well. Why can Europe be the reply? Well, Europe had the first REACT program during the pandemic. It was very quick to deploy, and it allowed associations like Restos du Cœur simply to hold on and implement some projects. Today, the Restos du Cœur call for the European help. Without a second REACT program, that could very easily allow us to have credits in order to make sure that no association disappears or reduce the aid they're providing. So the interest of this REACT 2 program would be for us to continue what we do with these people. It would also allow providing food and non-food product, with quality product, and at local level. It is very important for us to have an additional financial aid, because even at local level, our department association have difficulties to pay for their operation. We have already talked to the national authorities and the Prime Minister on this necessity. So I'm available if you have any question.
And now we pass the floor to the next speaker from Spain, Albert Acarons. advisory of the High Commissioner for the Fight Against Child Poverty.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation today. We are very happy to join you today to explain what we are doing in Spain in connection with what is being done in the European Union. I'm not going to share any slide, but I will try to make a short and hopefully clear intervention. So basically, what we are concerned in Spain is basically the relation. Well, in the office I represent, it's an office that we have the mandate of reducing child poverty and inequality in our country, and we have been working lately, well, in the last 2 years mostly, in a new topic, which is the relationship between child poverty, inequality, and childhood obesity and overweight. So basically, we think that one of the main consequences of food poverty and insecurity in European economies is childhood obesity. It's, as it was already mentioned, the pandemic of the 21st century, a big problem for also for our health and sanitary systems, and for all these reasons, the government we have coordinated inside the government a national strategic plan for the reduction of childhood obesity that was presented in June last year. And that it's also available, a shorter version is available online in English in case you want to or you are interested. So basically, this is one of the first 3 initiatives that we are conducting related to food insecurity and food poverty in Spain from the government that I would like to share with you. So this is the first one, the National Strategic Plan. As I was saying, is one of the main public health problems in Europe related to inequality also and poverty. And for example, in Spain, the percentage of children with obesity doubles for children in low-income households compared to children in the highest income households. So there is also an inequality gap, as the data shows, and we were also concerned on reducing this gap on childhood obesity in Spain. Basically, the plan, and today we are talking about food, but I also wanted to say that our plan gives an integral response. So it takes a more approach of combining on the intersection of different axes, that are related to also to sports, sleeping, and well-being, because all these are interconnected factors. As was already mentioned, poverty is multidimensional. So basically, if you sleep, if you don't sleep well, you also are have problems of eating well, and then of being more social, etc., and having well-being. So we have to understand everything as a compendium of things instead of separating. But we have these 6 strategic lines for action in our plan. It's for 2030, the time horizon. And one of these strategic axes is to generate a social ecosystem that promotes healthy eating. And we set targets for 2025 and 2030 to reduce overweight and obesity for the general children population, but also to reduce particularly the social gap in these 2 indicators. And basically, the action plan, I just want to go quickly on the priority measures we have established. Some of them has already been, and I'm very happy that we coincide in the solutions with all the different actors that have spoken before me. So basically, the action plan have some priority measures, and the ones who are related to food insecurity, only the ones who are related to food insecurity is the one I'm going to focus quickly. So basically, one of the first priority measures is to guarantee a healthy food environment within the educational system. We think this is very important. There's also this network of healthy schools as well that we are also trying to interact with and engage, because we think it's very important that in the places where children are, when all the children are, because it's the mandatory schooling, we have to guarantee that this is a healthy food environment for them, for that. So all these actions in the education system, we think they are key, and it's one of the main environments in which we think we have to do the most transformations. Then another priority measure is free access to drinking water. We have there is a lot of evidence that drinking water is very important also to control overweight and obesity, but also for other things related to health. And we were concerned that this access was not available throughout the different territories of our country. So we also had this priority measure, economic accessibility to healthy foods, and this has been already discussed, and maybe I will say something later. Regulate the food supply of educational health and a sports center. These are centers also when in the afternoons, etc. I think we think it is important. Healthy evolution of food and beverage aimed at children, and breastfeeding promotion. These are some of the priority measures we have identified in our plan that you can look at it if you are interested in English. And this is our strategic plan, the Spanish strategic plan for 2030. The second structural measure I wanted to mention is our national action plan for the implementation of the child guarantee. It was already discussed by some of the colleagues and the colleague from Eurochild, which I totally agree with. I think this is the main framework we have at the moment to produce some good outputs in Europe at the European level with the coordinated action of all the member states. Spain, we have allocated more than double of the amount required by the European Commission to fight child poverty. So as your child colleague was saying, there was a 5% mandatory amount, and we have doubled this amount. So we are very happy that we have managed to do so. And for us, the school canteens are essential for reducing food poverty and food insecurity. This is going to be our strategic access on this topic, and school meals also help in acquiring healthy styles, a healthy and balanced diet, both during a school year and vacation periods, which I'm going to refer quickly within our program we have. So basically, this is our main important part we want to affect. The school meals inside this guarantee. So this is the strategic for us. Then we have reformulated also the fund for European aid to the most deprived, that now is included in the European Social Fund for the first time, as you know. And we consider the possibility, and we basically have made more flexible the requirements. So now these resources can be allocated also to financing school meals and a school canteen. So I think it is also important to add flexibility to these funds that were less flexible until now.
Albert, thank you very much. I'm very sorry I have to interrupt you because we are running a little bit behind the schedule, but I'm sure we'll have room for a later discussion.
Perfect.
So thank you very much for your contribution. And if there are any questions both for Patrice or for Albert, otherwise I can also pose one to Patrice. I have a question. Mr. Duré, a new campaign was launched by Restos du Cœur to collect food, and which also served as opportunity to make an online donation. The campaign actions are also occurring here in Belgium and in Charleroi, for instance, and in the local media. Would you like to add any information or to share with us a key message on this initiative, and how is it developing?
Je pense que vous devez évoquer la collecte nationale qui a lieu.
I guess you mentioned the national collection that happens every year at national level. So in 7,000 stores, it's a higher number than the previous year. This year, we could collect 8,700 tons of food. It's a very important operation for Restos du Cœur because it allows, first of all, to mobilize all our volunteers in companies, volunteers that want to give one day for our association. And they come in over 7,000 stores, food stores, to collect everything that people want to give, like a pack of pasta or a pack of nappies, or even sometimes a whole cards of products. This year, we oriented our needs on hygiene for children. And the second important aspect of such dates is to have our mission known. It's the best time for our volunteers to be face-to-face with people helping us to talk about our missions. It's also the opportunity to recognize the wonderful job which is carried out by all the volunteers. So it's a very important operation which is carried out these days.
So we now start with the third panel. What is the EU doing? Looking back and looking ahead to the next EU term. And I give the floor to Ruth Parseman,
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes,
sorry,
but
I have a question for Albert. Okay, thank you. I have a question for Albert. Albert, you were talking before about your strategic and action plan, and which is pretty interesting because you are developing a lot of initiatives to fight poverty, not only food poverty, but also nutrition aspects and all the other things correlated. So do you think is something missing? Do you think, did you see an improvement in a good way of the situation? And if you can explain all those kind of things. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. We have put in place a lot of different measures, I think, from the government of Spain to try to counteract this, because we identified a huge relationship between inequality and obesity in our country. So we wanted to put a lot of measures into place. One of the other measures we put into place was the summer programs to provide also food in summer camps, which we have like 15 million every year as well to reduce the food insecurity during summers. And I think it's important to take into account all the measures together. Now of the inflation, in the inflation process we have been immersed, we were in Spain also acting upon, and we have one of the lowest now in Europe, but also the food is also a problem here in Spain. So basically what we designed was these two kind of things, and I'll be very quick. We are also supporting from our office as a complementary thing to food banks, of course, the prepaid cards and the wallet cards that we are also supporting in municipalities and led by different NGOs. And this is also very good when we have these kind of shocks to the economy, you know, that we don't have time to set up a food bank or have more or reach all the territory, etc. So this we think is a very flexible mechanism as well. And also the cash transfers we have implemented of 200 euros for families with low income, which they can basically use for food. So these are the two options that we have identified as most successful for the times we had now in our country related to food insecurity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question? If not the case, panel 3 now. What is the EU doing? Looking back and looking ahead to the next EU term. Let me introduce Ruth Parseman, Director at DG Employment of the European Commission for the funds, programming and implementation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this invitation. I hope you can hear me. Yes. Yeah, it's fine. You can hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Well, honestly, the previous speakers know much more about the implementation of the material support than I do on the ground. I can give you the general lines, but I think a lot of the things that I could have said have been said by previous speakers. So to summarize, we had since in the previous period, in the programming period 2014-2020, there was FEAD, which was mentioned before, and this FEAD had an overall allocation of 3.8 million, if I'm not wrong. Billion, sorry, 3.8 billion during the 7 years, which was enhanced, like was mentioned before, by REACT-EU, and it arrived at 4.4 billion until let's say, until 2023. The REACT-EU can be spent until the end of 2023. In the meantime, the period 21-27, we have integrated the ex-FEAD material deprivation arm directly in the European Social Fund Plus with an overall budget of 4.5 billion. So there is a de facto, though, the programming period 21-22 has only started this year because practically no country had started program, no country had done any programming in 21-22, which is the reason why we introduced REACT-EU, because with COVID, everything was delayed and projects were delayed, etc. So in conclusion, there is an overlap, if you want, in 2023, in the sense that one can conclude the expenditures of REACT-EU for the past, and we launched the new programs which can go on until 2027 plus 3 years. Okay, all this to say, now I completely agree with the comment that I think was made by Patrice Duré, that there is a kind of scissor in the sense that on one hand, the needs are increasing, and on the other hand, the facto the money is decreasing because of inflation. The overall budget of the Commission for the period 21-27 was built on the assumption of a 2% rate of inflation throughout the period. So you can see that actually we are in the same problem as you for all our budget operations, I mean, on everything, because of course inflation is not 2%, but 5 times that much. Okay, inflation is already going down, but this problem of tightness or difficulty of the European budget is across the board, unfortunately. Now, having said that, so first started with just the budget things, very boring, well, but very fundamental, and not very good news, perhaps, as I can see it. I don't think there is any view or any possibility of having a new REACT. I mean, the new REACT is de facto the new ESF Plus, as I said before, with a budget of 4.5 billion euros for the period. Member states, I think someone said this, they were obliged to program 3% of the ESF Plus budget on material deprivation, but de facto this is overall is 4% actually, not 3%. And also there are some countries where it is much higher than that, like France or Romania, it's more like 8%. Now, of course, so this is what we can do from the point of view of European funding. This is linked, of course, also to European policy development. Notably, these have been framed by the European pillar of social rights, and in particular the action plan that was approved in 2021. And here 2 points are relevant. One is the child guarantee, which has been mentioned quite a lot so far, which indeed concludes one provision about making sure that children have one hot meal a day. And the child guarantee has been approved in time for it to be used in the programming of the ESF at national level, which means that there is quite a lot of attention in the, so first of all, the ESF also had a minimum mathematic concentration, I think, of 5% for investing in children, but also this has been, I mean, I can't remember how much more, but it is actually more that is reserved overall as an average in the member states. Although it was not compulsory for all member states, it was only for member states that had a high level of child poverty. And we are now, all member states are supposed to do a plan on how they intend to implement the recommendation on child guarantee. And so far we have about 2/3 of the countries have proposed the plan, and we're waiting still. I mean, we're still talking, but we haven't received yet plan to address the child guarantee from 8 member states. And of course, as someone mentioned already, one of the speakers, there has to be, the plan is the first step, then it has to be implemented, the Commission has to monitor it, etc. But we're relatively confident also because of the possibility to support it with the ESF investment, which was, because it arrived more or less at the same, the planning, so there is a kind of parallel track between the policy development and the financial developments, let's say, financial availabilities. The third point, which is interesting, is the agreement on a framework on minimum income. And this is also a recommendation, like the one on the child guarantee. It was adopted finally only in January this year. And that is interesting because it also is, I mean, the key point is actually to make sure that, I mean, most countries have a minimum income, but it's like ticking the box. I mean, it's very, in some countries, the level is really, really ridiculous. So it has to be improved, that it is at an adequate level. Also that it is, the coverage is wide, both in theory, but also in practice, that there is a significant level of take-up. And then, of course, we are quite attentive to further supportive measures, because it's not just minimum income forever, but you want to make sure that people have access to social services, that they have access, if possible, to activation measures and so on. So this also, we will look at plans, etc., but we are just starting now with the implementation. This is as far as I can go. I don't know. I mean, we are in the Commission. We are now starting the reflections for the next programming period, which is the program period which starts in 2028. So we're very, very, very far away from, thinking how it's going to be. Consider that this programming period, as I said, did not actually start in 21, but it's starting now in 2023. So we're a bit squeezed between having started late on one side and having to start also the reflection for the future for the next period. So this is, I think, this debate is also interesting for me to understand, what works and what doesn't work, and therefore what we would want to put for the future. For example, in FED vouchers were not allowed in the original FED 2014-2020. With COVID, of course, moving to vouchers rather than only physical distribution became an imperative. So we did that change, and of course vouchers were proposed from the beginning, I think, in the new ESF Plus regulation. So this is one of the point actually where we have evolved, and this is, I don't know, you can call it simplification if you want. Finally, I just want to say that indeed we have what we call a community of practice, which is this basically managing authorities, but also implementing partners. I mean, some of you are involved in this community of practice on material deprivation. And the first meeting is actually tomorrow. I don't know if you can still join, those of you who are not yet inscribed, but the key issue is really to discuss practical implementation, including some of the issues of the problems that were mentioned here, like the increase in the cost of operations and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Passerman. And now we will give the floor to Will Sermon, Director of Strategic Communications from Public Affairs and SDG Food Drinks Europe. Will?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And hello to everybody on the call. I'm really happy to be here today. Food Drink Europe, for those of you that don't know, represent the food manufacturing industry. So we're the ones that make the food, or at least our members are the ones that make the food and the drinks that people need. I just want to start first on a personal note. It's really great, the speakers that we've had so far. I think it's been so interesting. I mean, food poverty is a scandal in Europe. It really is, and the fact that so many people are short or unable to access food is such a scandal. I'm really pleased to see Patrice and hear your comments from Resto de Coeur. At Food Drink Europe, we actually regularly support in our own small way donations to Resto de Coeur. So we know your good work personally, and also to have Angela from FEBA, from the European Food Banks as well. Again, our members work really closely with the European Food Banks and the national food banks all around Europe, and have a very close relationship. And actually, we're working with FEBA as Food Drink Europe at the moment to update our food donation guidelines to help support our members, the industry, to donate food and to help to fight food poverty where it exists. And also, we at Food Drink Europe, we have a really good relationship with the Brussels Food Bank. And for those of you that don't know the Brussels Food Bank, it's a fantastically well-run unit in Brussels, serving more than 30,000 people on our doorstep. And at Food Drink Europe as well, we're really proud to be supporting the Brussels Food Bank as well. If I take a step back a little bit and think about the industry, the food manufacturing industry as a whole, I mean, we're absolutely central to this discussion. Of course, given the vast majority of food that is distributed or that people need to have access to for a healthy and balanced diet, it comes from the food manufacturers and the drink manufacturers. There are 294,000 businesses in Europe making food, about 1.5 billion meals every day that are distributed to or bought by people in Europe and beyond Europe. But what's really apparent from this conversation is the need to fix the system, the food system, so that there is sufficient food in the right places, that it's affordable, and that also that's nutritious, and we get that nutrition balance right. We've spoken a bit about obesity and some of the health-related issues of a poor diet. One area I wanted to touch upon is affordability, and that clearly that is one of the really important elements and one of the major challenges in terms of being able to deliver or reduce food poverty is to have affordable food. The last few years have been extremely challenging, as everybody knows, as every industry and every individual knows. Very challenging on our personal finances, and many businesses have struggled to deal with the inflationary pressures as well. And just in the food manufacturing industry, we collect inflationary data, and we saw natural gas prices going up 310%, price of materials like plastic going up 16% year on year, crude oil prices going up 46%. You know, it's incredible figures that 4 or 5 years ago we could never have predicted. And to a large extent, the food manufacturers have absorbed a lot of those costs. The inflation of the prices at food manufacturer level have gone up faster than the prices at consumer level. But there's still a major issue, and we need to work out how to help to deal with this cost of living crisis, and to get to the question of the day, or the question of this session, to deal with the food poverty crisis whilst also working on the Green Deal and farm to fork. So all those things that Lucas mentioned at the beginning of this conversation around how do we deal with the climate emergency, with the biodiversity collapse, with the obesity crisis and plastic waste, whilst also dealing with food poverty, whilst also, by the way, having thriving and viable businesses to deliver on some of these major challenges. And it's not an either or either. I think we at Food Drink Europe and the food manufacturing industry, we're absolutely committed to delivering on the Green Deal ambition and the farm to fork ambition, whilst also dealing with the challenge around food poverty, whilst also ensuring that there is a viable industry and manufacturing sector, providing the 4.6 million jobs in Europe and being a real engine for the EU economy and for many SMEs, small and medium-sized businesses as well. So if we're not going to neglect any of these challenges, and we have to do everything, it sounds ambitious, and it is ambitious. And that's why we've had quite a lot of internal reflection about, well, what do we need? What do we think is needed at an EU level? I mean, the discussion opened up about what does this current mandate and the next mandate look like in terms of the policy needs. We believe that we urgently need a food investment and resilience plan, a real plan. So this would be to complement the Green Deal industrial plan. It would also counter the US Inflation Reduction Act as well, where we feel there is currently a gap in support for the wider food chain. I'm not talking about food manufacturing necessarily, but up and down the food chain, to support the investment and resilience needed for the food chain to deliver on all those challenges I just outlined. And I'll pick out 3 major pieces of the food plan as we see it. And the first is around investment. We can't just click our fingers in Brussels and hope for the best. And I think sometimes that happens. We think that if we said it and it's written on a piece of paper, that it might happen. But there needs to be real money behind a lot of the rhetoric that we hear in Brussels. We think that there's probably at least an €8 billion gap when it comes to delivering more sustainable agriculture in Europe. How do we pay for that? Who pays for that? I think there's private sector investment clearly, but there also needs to be public sector commitment as well. The European Investment Bank recently said that there was a €6.7 billion gap to meet a circular economy goal for 10 million tons of recycled plastic by 2025. You know, the numbers stack up. Those are just two good examples of where we need the investment to deliver on this great ambition of the Green Deal, whilst also making sure that people can access affordable food. So if investment is number one, number two is our innovation environment and making sure that we are absolutely 100% committed as policymakers, as industry, to supporting innovators, to giving innovators the confidence to invest, to develop, and then to implement. And I can think about a couple of game-changing technologies like chemical recycling to ensure the circular economy transition. And also you might think about things like new genomic techniques, tools that can be available to farmers to help them in their transition. And the final piece of this plan, the final major piece of the plan, is around coordination and governance. So we really feel like there needs to be a better coordination, an integrated approach, a joined up policy to make sure that we can fight food poverty whilst also meeting the Green Deal objectives, whilst also supporting business and business viability. And whether that's a DG food within the European Commission, but it needs to be something that removes the fragmented, sometimes contradictory approach that we see coming out of different departments within the European Commission, to have a really joined up, effective, multi-stakeholder approach that works and really delivers on fighting these challenges and recognizes food and its absolute strategic importance to the EU and its ambition around the Green Deal, and just culturally as well, and delivering for consumers and delivering for our well-being. So quite a lot there in a few minutes. I'll drop the a link to the letter that we recently wrote to the President of the European Commission, von der Leyen, about this plan, so that you can look at it in more detail. But I'll stop there. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you very much, Will, for your very interesting information. And now we are back to Q&A, to a Q&A session. Any question? But before, let me introduce the last speaker of the panel, Başak Babaoğlu, Manager of EU Affairs, Corporate Responsibility and Public Policy at Metro. Başak, are you there?
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julia. And I will share my presentation.
Başak, we can do it for you.
Can you see it? Do you see it now?
We do.
Full screen, please.
Yes. I think it's fine now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to share our insights on reducing food waste, increasing food donations, with some very concrete policy recommendations. So I also hope to address some of the questions raised to the first panel. A few words on Metro. We are an international food wholesaler, so we are doing B2B business, and our main consumers are from the hospitality sector, the hotels, restaurants, and catering industry, and the independent traders. We are operative worldwide over 30 countries, 14 of which are in the EU member states. And back in 2016, by Consumer Goods Forum, we have set a measurable time-bound and group-wide target to reduce food waste in our own operations by 50% in 2025. And that's why we have set the baseline year of 2017-2018 financial year. And we are continuing to engage with our external and internal stakeholders to achieve this target. And if you have a look at our progress on food waste, we are delivering our targets. We are well on track of achieving our 50% reduction by 2025. Both in absolute and in adjusted terms, we see the decline over the years, over the reporting years, and 11% in absolute terms, but also 15% in adjusted terms. So we are now at the point of 9.6 kilo of food waste per square meter of selling and delivery space. But the good news is we are managing to increase the food donations as well over the years, both in quantity and in value. This means partnering with food banks in 23 different countries worldwide. And both in quantity and value, it's not part of the diagram, but in the last financial year, it has even increased to 63 million euros in value. But we say more can be done if it weren't for the challenges we faced in donations. And these challenges are mainly on logistical issues. That means the availability of food banks in the region, your suppliers, and our platforms. So it very much depends on the frequency of the visits to our platforms by the food banks, for example. You have to have a well-established and well-functioning systems and delivery systems. If the food banks come to our platforms only twice a week, for instance, and surplus food is available on the next day, unfortunately for fresh and ultra-fresh foods, this mostly means a waste. Then we have also the legal issues, and it is very much related to the ownership of goods in international trade. If the goods are transferred from country A by a country B supplier and are rejected for any reason in country A, it can be false labeling, it can be quality issues, wrong packaging, or the wrong amount. The question arises, who owns the goods? It is still the country B supplier legally in most cases, but if the supplier is not registered in country A, it is refrained from making the donation. So the donation is not possible, and the registration on tax and commercial purposes is very costly, is lengthy, and it is also not expected for the suppliers to have registration in all the countries they trade with. And unfortunately, the food can then again be wasted. And I'm sorry to say that, but the cost of treatment of this waste can even be less than the administrative cost of this registration procedure. And we also have some financial challenges. We have a VAT and EU VAT directive, which is the legal basis in Europe, and member states are responsible for transposing these provisions into national legislations. And the VAT issues do have implications on food donations. The EU VAT committee agreed on some guidelines to ensure the uniform application of this directive. And in some countries, we see that little or no VAT is paid on donations, but in other countries, it is paid on market value or the purchasing price of the donated amount. And that's a major issue. And again, we have some problems then with the VAT returns when different countries are involved, if this registration hasn't taken place in the destination country. So what do we recommend? I'm skipping the logistics part because we are already trying to tackle these problems by some digital solutions, but our recommendations really come on the legal and financial incentives. First, facilitated commercial and tax registration in the countries, in the member states for donation purposes. Another one is a VAT exemption for donations, definitely. And the third one is a zero VAT rate. And this means that the supplies of goods and services is made free of VAT, but the input VAT deduction on related costs and purchases are still possible. So it's kind of an input VAT credit, and it can be used by the entrepreneur. And this is a bit different than the VAT exemption, because the VAT exempt services do not include the right to deduct the input VAT, which makes the supply of goods more expensive. So, for example, we have some zero-rated sales on exports and intra-community supplies of goods, but examples of VAT exemptions come from financial insurance services and service provided by the hospitals and doctors, for instance. And for the donations, the implementation of a zero VAT rate would really solve the problems for the companies in many cases. There are also further financial incentives possible, of course, regarding corporate tax via tax deductions and tax credits. If you can deduct some value of the food at the time of the donation, and if you can claim it as a corporate tax credit, we see that in the countries who have these incentives, the donations are at a higher rate. With this, I conclude my 5-minute presentation, but I'm happy to have any questions now or later, because my contact details are also in the presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Basha, for presenting key figures on the progress of food waste and the challenges for donation, being Metro a leading market player. So any questions? Any questions from the participants? Otherwise, there's a question, yes, for Ruth Wasserman, posed by Food Drink Europe. Ruth, you reported and commented about different levels of financial support distribution, and we heard about gap investments, also in Will's intervention. So do you believe there are sufficient funds to finance the changes needed, and with reference to both the public and the private domain?
Okay, I think there are two dimensions. I mean, one dimension of availability of funding is public versus private, and another dimension is national versus European. The European budget is very limited, as you know. It's maintained at 1% of the official line is that the EU budget is 1% of GDP, of EU GDP. Now, with Next Generation EU, we had an exceptional increase in the availability of funds at EU level through borrowing. The question is whether in the future, member states will want to continue with this kind of one-off expenditure. And well, the jury is out, to be honest. I have no clue whatsoever. And you know as much as I do the feelings of different countries. So that's, it depends also, it depends. But realistically, let's say, we would aim the aim is to have a budget of 1% of GDP at European level, which of course limits enormously the resources that are available from the EU level. At the national level, I mean, this would be instead of the national level. So this is, if the resources are limited at EU level, there has to be possibly more resources at national level. Or if member states decide to pool these resources, it comes nonetheless from the national resources, if you see what I mean. Huh? So it's not necessarily, I mean, the amount. So I think what is important, on the other hand, I think there is, of course, there are also private resources, as Will pointed out. I mean, the question is if you want to find a good mix, to have a good leverage that can incentivize the resources at private level, with, for example, an initial start or input of resources which can be national or European. So I think it's a bit complex to find the right instruments. I don't think there is no money available at all, but I do think that the construction is not obvious.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ruth. Now there's another question. We would like to understand what it is needed to improve EU programs and what you're expecting from the proposal tabled by the sustainable food systems. This is a general question addressing all speakers, so feel free to take the floor.
Please, 30 seconds each, because we do not have time, and then we need to give the floor to the MEPs for the conclusion. Thank you.
You mean the proposal by Food Drink Europe?
Yes, no, in general, the proposals applying to the sustainable food systems, in this case, the Food Drink Europe proposal.
No, that's more about internal governance in a way, also
okay.
The Commission. I think a lot of the actions that are happening, so I'm not, in general, there are a lot of actions that have been mentioned by colleagues, which can be useful to improve the situation, and we can learn from each other, and that is also one of the objectives of this community of practice that I was mentioning that we'd start working tomorrow, which is more focalized on ESF plus and improving ways of implementing ESF plus, and that so it's not the whole debate, so that can be an instrument.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Okay, indeed, the reference was to the sustainable systems regulation. So now we are closing the event, and for just yes, it's definitely time to close. So we give the floor to the hosting MEP, Soraya Rodriguez Ramos, for her closing remarks. Ms. Rodriguez Ramos, are you with us?
No sé, ¿ahora me escucháis?
Now, can you hear me?
Voy a hablar en español.
I'm going to speak in Spanish because it seems to be an interpreter. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you very much and welcome. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. I have been following especially the last two panels because I had a meeting before, but this has been a very enriching debate with very clear perspectives. I don't work in this regard, so I want to focus on food security in terms of production and the proposals that the Commission and the European Parliament have started in order to reach the goals of the Green Deal. I wanted to say that the situation of food poverty and the lack of food in the EU shows what we say constantly. We say that hunger has increased in many places in the world, but this problem is not only about the availability of food, is a problem that has to do with rights, with human rights. When we talk about food security in the EU, this is clear. We have enough food. We have to talk about accessibility. And this lack of accessibility is about vulnerability and the lack of income that a part of the population is suffering. And this should be a fundamental right. It is the fundamental right to have a good access to food. And when we talk about this, we talk about nutritious food so people can develop normally. And this is at risk. An important part of our citizens is affected, and it affects more drastically to children, as is often the case. This is something that is going to be part of the rest of their lives if they suffered this during their childhood. And then we also have obesity, which is a topic that we already talked about. And it's something that can affect personal, educational development. It is something that is going to carry out different consequences throughout our lives. So there are no excuses to not tackle this problem. As I said, the European Union produces enough food. And of course, we are seeing that in the last years, because of the COVID pandemic, and now with the war in Ukraine, we are seeing how the costs are rising, and it's something unprecedented. However, it is not a problem that comes with the application of the measures of the Green New Deal, but a problem that comes with the rising of the cost of inputs, of the rising of cost of pesticides, for example, that are making the prices rise. With these, I want to clarify that we need to make efforts that we needed to make before. And we need to restore biodiversity as well from our agricultural lands. Because this is about sustainability as well. Sustainability and food security are linked. With the European Green Deal, we are trying to fight for food security. With the European Green Deal and other measures, like the one that we are debating right now in the Parliament, the nature restoration law, what we are going to avoid is collapsing our ecosystems. During the last few years, our ecosystems have been deteriorated constantly, and resources that are very important, such as soil quality, butterflies, bees, have been reduced drastically. This is a risk for us in the future. It's a risk for food security in Europe. Therefore, there are no contradictions in the European Green Deal. There is a connection. We cannot forget that restoring our biodiversity and our ecosystem and our ecosystems is talking about the health of our citizens. Our guests have already talked about this, but I think that it is very important to do integrated scopes about food systems. We include production, food production, primary production. We talk about manufacturing, we talk about supply, and we also have to include the main element that is food, which is the rights. We have to take into account that this is something that the Commission and the European institutions have to do. They need to put in place policies in order to guarantee that the food is adequate and nutritious. We can do it. You have been debating on all of these elements in this event. And I think we need to guarantee our food sovereignty. And for that, we need to know that our food production needs to be sustainable in regards with our natural resources. Talking about sustainability means talking with those that are not here. Sustainability means producing food that is healthy and sustainable for us, but also for the next generations. This next generation are not here right now, but they have the same rights as we do. This is why we have to make an effort. This is the effort behind the European Green New Deal and of some initiatives such as the nature restoration law, or reducing 50% of the phytosanitary products. This is a guarantee of food security for today, but also for tomorrow. For those generations that are still not here, but that have the right to benefit from this. So there are no contradictions between the efforts in the European Green Deal and the restoration of our biodiversity and our agriculture system. We have to debate with our farmers and our producers, and we have to work with them hand in hand, because our ecosystems have to be restored. We also have to be aware that the situation that we have right now, where more and more people are vulnerable in a vulnerable situation, we need to protect them. We need to give them food. And this is not a problem about food accessibility. It is a problem, as I said, about rights. And this is the baseline of our democracies. All the actions that we are carrying out are necessary, but I think that we should prioritize these actions even more. We have talked about figures. We have talked about 59 million tons of food waste. We have talked about European children that are going to suffer because throughout their lives, because they didn't have an adequate access to nutrients. Therefore, this debate has been very enriching. We want to support you in the institutions, and we need to support you even more, because your work should be done by the institutions themselves. So I think we have to be very thankful for that. Thank you very much, Soraya, for your participation. Thank you very much for this very powerful message.
But please let me add a few words. For those who joined this event today but haven't yet signed up to become a member of the European Food Forum, this is a good opportunity to jump on board and join the platform, to have your voice heard in the ongoing and future talks on the future of food and agriculture. So for this purpose, please contact Luisella Ciani, Director of the Food Forum, and you can send her an email to info@europeanfoodforum.eu. And now I save the date for the next forum events, planned for 5th of May, to open the US-EU dialogue on sustainable packaging in cooperation with the United States mission to the EU, on the 23rd and 24th of May, to launch the Global Conference on Sustainability in Agriculture and Food Systems, Innovation, Indicators and Implementation. The event is organized by Reimagine Europe in partnership with the European Food Forum. A last one, date to be confirmed in June, we will discuss the role of climate neutral products in sustainability for food systems. Thank you very much to all speakers, guests, and the participants to this debate. It has been a big pleasure to listen to all your presentations. As journalists, I have to say it has been very inspirational. So thank you again. And we look forward to tabling the next exchange.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.